You're listening to the Empowering Process podcast with your host, Gail Kraft. Listen as she holds frank discussions around how your purpose, being present, and trusting your power impacts your life. Whether you're an entrepreneur, leader, or developing your vision, you'll find wisdom and insights you can utilize right now. Welcome your host, Gail Kraft.
Hello, everybody. Gail Kraft here from the Empowering Process podcast. Thank you for joining me. With me today, I have a wonderful guest that's going to surprise us, I'm sure, with her amazement. And this is Brenda, say it without my Boston accent, right?
I recognize the New York accent.
Right? Adelman, right?
Adelman.
Adelman. So Brenda is, so this is why I say she's amazing. Yes, she's an actress. Yes, she's a comedian. Yes, she has many talents, but she has a story she's going to share with us that will floor you. Brenda is an actor, a life story and solo show mentor, speaker, author, transformational life coach. She's a Renaissance woman, and she's going to talk to us about the art of forgiveness, because it ain't that easy. And most people have no clue what they're talking about when they say forgiveness. We're not saying condoning, we're not saying it's okay with what happened. It's about being okay to get on with your life. So welcome, Brenda.
Yeah, more than okay.
Yes, more than okay.
Thanks so much for that beautiful introduction. Yeah, so maybe I should just get right into my story, which brought me to finding my way to forgiveness. So let me do the fun place, because the fun one, because you set me up as a comedian. All right. Okay. So I grew up in Brooklyn with a Jewish wannabe Italian father who taught me how to drive a Cadillac when I was 6 and how to shoot a gun when I was 10. A bohemian artist mom who took me traveling with her all over the world and read Shakespeare to me from the time I was 3 years old as a bedtime story. Big characters, big love, big laughs. And then in 1995, and this is true, as it all is, my father, who I adored, shot and killed my mom, who was my best friend, and within months moved in with and then married my aunt, my mother's sister. First, I was depressed. First, I was in shock. First, I was angry. All those things. Actually, I squashed my anger, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But it was finding the strength within myself to forgive my father that changed my life, opened my life up, allowed me to trust myself again, allowed myself to bring in loving people, have great relationships, create a one-woman show. I've toured all over the world, really impacting people with my 3-step forgiveness method, and now teaching other people who've lived through so much how to tell their story in a captivating way that really helps people.
Yes. And so, my God, did you just gloss over that? And my father shot my mother, and then a few months later married my aunt. And then right. Let's get back.
Sorry. Okay. Here's the thing. I thank you. I've been telling this story for over 15 years on and off, and I forget sometimes that you guys are hearing it for the first time. Like, I know you heard this, but yeah, let's break it down a little bit.
Just a little. Yeah. So how the heck, see, I didn't even swear, I'm getting better, did your father commit this crime and not end up behind bars? You witnessed this crime.
No, I did not witness it.
Oh, you did not? Okay, good.
Oh my God, no. I'm already scarred from, my father did go to jail, and after he got out, I'll tell you that my brother, he only went to jail for 2.5 years on a plea bargain, involuntary manslaughter, because his gun, the gun that I learned to shoot on, that I talked about, disappeared. There were 8 hours before the cops were called, and my father already had a lawyer in place, and the gun was gone. And so because of that, the DA said, basically they agreed to this plea bargain with my father, because they said that if it went to court without the murder weapon, it would be possible my father wouldn't get any time. So he got 2.5 to 5 years, and he got out in 2.5 years for good behavior. The plea bargain said he killed our mother by recklessly causing his pistol to discharge directly into her head.
Mm.
And that's involuntary manslaughter. And when he got out, he was already married to my aunt and living with her. My brother and I decided to take him to court for wrongful death. And when we did, because that was our only recourse, I remember my attorney put a picture of my mom, her head, her face, that when she was dead on the table so that the jury could see it, I guess. And it's still in my mind. It's one of those things. So thank God I didn't witness it. It would have been even worse at the time for sure. I was in California at the time. I flew back to New York the next day.
Right. Right. So when we talk about trauma, right, and anger and the need to forgive, we all have trauma, different levels of trauma in our life, and it doesn't make your trauma less valid than hers or more valid.
Right.
Trauma is trauma, and we've all had some experiences in our life that bring us down energetically, feeds off of us, and doesn't allow us to show up fully as to who we are, and we deny ourselves that gift to ourselves and to the world. So share with us, if you don't mind, your journey to trying to heal, right, using the method called psychiatry, and then realizing that wasn't going deep enough to really heal, and what you did.
Yeah, well, I actually opted out of getting any kind of pills to numb my pain. But I did go to therapy. Everything helped me, really, that I did. I remember I left town, and where I worked, the manager had already had appointments set up with me for a therapist, which was so great. And that did help, especially on those times when I was so mixed, because I loved my father so much, I loved my mother so much, and then I lost them both. And for all intents and purposes, at the time, my whole family. And that night, because my brother and I are half brother and sister, it was my father who killed our mother. My brother's older than me, so we had a rift for a good 6 years that we've completely reconciled. Because at the time, my psyche, I mean, this is the short version of it. I could not believe my father did this. I chose to believe his lies. I just emotionally couldn't deal with it. And my brother knew he did do it. So, as his stepfather, he could see it more clearly. But like I said, my forgiveness process works. My brother and I completely reconciled. He actually produced my one-woman show about our life story in a big festival in Europe several years ago, which was great. The thing about the one-person show, which I teach, or creative public speaking, is that my brother and I didn't even speak about things that much. But yet he got to see what I had been going through on stage, which was so incredible. But I digress. So I went to therapy, and then I started writing when it was late at night, when I couldn't sleep and I was so miserable. I was engaged at the time my mom died, and we broke up. And honestly, I feel like it was because I could not be witnessed in my pain. It was so dark and it was so deep. So there I was alone, not being able to sleep, watching back then Oprah at until 1 a.m. or something. Thank God for her and that show. And really, it was my introduction to, oh, there's a way for things to be more positive. I can get out of my own way. I really didn't trust myself to make any good decisions because I felt like I trusted my father. How could I trust anybody again?
Mm-hmm.
I got into an acting class about a year after my mom died, and that was the class that a couple years into it, because there was an actress already, there was an exercise called a personal monologue or something like that, where you're supposed to be real, telling your story, because I was hiding. I wasn't telling anyone. I was so filled with shame. I hadn't done any of the inner work I've been doing all these years. And I wrote my story out, and I know how to write. I know how to do comedy. I know how to do a lot of things. Once you have some comedy, you actually know you've gotten to another level of healing with the piece. Not like funny, like, ha ha, my mother was killed by my father. More like the, the irony of life, the like seeing things in such an ironic way that you have some distance. Anyway, I put the short piece up in this 100 person top acting class in LA, and I was so scared of being judged. I was so scared of being seen. But instead, I got a standing ovation for like 10 minutes, and people came up to me after and told me about their life story. That was different. It was like someone had a father who left them when they were a teenager and they had never forgiven them. And all of a sudden, they saw their perspective, like they saw it differently. And so that gave me the desire to expand on the piece. And then a director wanted to direct me, a producer wanted to produce it. Like it kind of was a snowball. As I was writing the show, this is the unique way of healing. As an actor, you can't play someone one note or like they're evil. Like I'm not going to play myself evil, because as a character, you have objectives, you have intentions, you want to do something. So I play about 10 characters in my show, including my father, and writing out his character was really healing for me, because I got to look at him as an overall being versus just the act that he did and what he took from me. And I had my show produced in LA a couple of years later, and it was a success. As far as, it was a small theater, I had good sized houses, people laughed, people cried, but I would go home and be miserable because I was in on again, off again relationship with my father. I hadn't healed the stuff, and so I took a couple of years off, found this wonderful program for my own healing, a master's in spiritual psychology. I learned how not to like to stop asking, why did this happen? And instead say, okay, now that it's happened, how can I thrive? While at the same time, I probably went to acupuncture to kind of get things out, the stuck energy out of my system.
I love acupuncture.
It's so good. And shamanic journeys and all kinds of healings that I did, and going to healers and cutting the energetic bonds and all that. Graduated from the master's in spiritual psychology, really life transforming. And then I started coaching on forgiveness and how I was able to forgive him, because there was a process, a really big, well, forgiveness is a journey. So each time you might think you've done great and then something else happens, but I did a forgiveness. I was taking a class at Agape. I don't know if you're familiar with
I love Agape. Yes.
Yeah,
Michael Beckwith's church.
Yes, that's how I got into like New Thought, Ancient Wisdom around the same time I was going from a master's program. And I was taking a class on, the foundations class, and there was a final project. And for me, this poem came out of me that showed me that my father and I were one, and that if I hated him, I hated a part of myself. And I was like, what? I don't want to do that to myself anymore. And that was so life transforming. And I created a ceremony around it. I took one of his hats that I had, went to the top of a mountain in LA. I actually act out this ceremony in my show, my Brooklyn Hamlet. I think it's partly why it's so successful with audiences, because they get to experience that. And for me, I get to experience new levels of healing when I do it. But yeah, I felt angels by my side for the first time in my life. I went up to the top of this mountain, threw his hat over the mountainside, and really felt something lift off of me. So that was the main healing process. And then a couple of years ago, right before COVID, I was performing with my show in Mexico. 6 months prior, it was January, and 6 months prior on Father's Day, all these years later. And we could talk about my relationship with him after if you have any other questions. But all these years later, I think I'm completely healed. And on Father's Day, a friend of mine was going to a gun range, and I'm like, I want to go to a gun range. I have not touched a gun, because my father and I used to go shooting together. I have not touched a gun since he died. I think it's going to be healing for me. So we went, and it was a quite healing process. I took the target sheet home, because if anyone's gone shooting, there's one target sheet that's like a big guy, it's like a caricature of a guy, but like my dad was this alpha male for Brooklyn. So I took it home thinking, maybe I'll use it in my show. Like, And then the next few months, like I was really stuck, and I felt like it's because I had this energy in this target sheet. So um that during the holidays, I did a ceremony release. I set it on fire in my home safely, and something released. Then I get on stage like a week or two later in Mexico, and I get to the part of the show that I've done thousands of times at this point. And it's like where I'm accusing my father and saying, "What happened? What happened? What happened? I need to know." Right? It's a mix of what happened in real life and also dream sequence, and it's usually so angry. And I'm a good actress. I know how to act. I know I broke down on stage, like so much sadness, but it was like the sadness from back then that I hadn't resolved because the anger covered over it. But thank God I am a trained actress and have the skill on stage and spiritual psychology, because otherwise I would have just laid on the floor and not been able to finish. But I did. I finished working through those emotions. And it was an incredible performance. It was an incredible connection for everybody. But then then I looked at it, because after I got off stage, I was very depressed. I'm like, I'm not doing this to be depressed. Like, let's do. So I looked at it and I realized I had never acted out in all those years. This is why it's so beautiful to be able to write and express your stories. There's so much to learn. There's a part in my show after that where I actually reveal how I had an experience with God, the universe, oneness, whatever it was that lifted me out of that dark place. But I'd always talked about it versus acted it. And there's a big difference between show and tell. So I looked at my script and it was right there. And then I started revealing that experience on stage. So it went from this really real, passionate, angry, sad, rageful place to surrender, like on stage. So it was incredible. So, I mean, that's the healing process for me. That's the healing process.
And I love that word surrender, because that's what the healing process is. It really, that you've gotten there when you feel that release of surrender. I love that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Because we spend so much of our life holding on and so much of our life trying to keep it under wraps, because we're taught that, when the healing's actually in the surrender. So you want to be around people who can understand that and be kind and everything like that. You want to be sharing and getting the help that you need. Because here's the thing, if you don't go into that place, that's always going to be stuck. Like that energy, that love, that sadness, that openness, if I didn't go into it, would still be a stuck place in my body where I wouldn't have experienced joy, you know? So yeah, so it's definitely multi-layered, and I do have a 3-step forgiveness process. I was honored to receive a Hero of Forgiveness Award from the Hawaii International Forgiveness Project, and my story would just came out in a book on forgiveness by the woman who founded the Forgiveness Project site in the UK. It's out now. She interviews people around the world who have really dealt with terrorism, all this other kind of stuff. But I do want to make a point that you said that everybody has something, because what I learned over the years of teaching forgiveness, now I teach storytelling mostly, but I also teach forgiveness when I used to do live workshops, is that someone could come into a workshop and have been going out with someone, in love with someone for 2 months. They break up and their level of upset could appear like as deep as what I went through. And so I learned to have compassion, and I learned to be like, it's so individual. It's like, that's not like that person's going through something too. They just also need the tools. And the other thing is, what I learned, which was the biggest thing, was self-forgiveness. Like, you would think I needed to forgive my father, when the truth was the biggest healing I got was forgiving myself, because I could only forgive him to the level that I would forgive myself, just like we can only love someone to the as much as we love ourselves.
And I love that. Speaking of love, so many of us have been raised, Sleeping Beauty and, Snow White, that our love lies in a relationship with another, right? That the love is dependent on this handsome or gorgeous being, right? However we define that BS, showing up to me. We're only whole, all of the songs about love, we're only whole when you're in my heart, when you're here, right?
Oh,
And
God.
my God, yes. And how toxic is
I
that
know.
to
I mean, I
me?
certainly must have felt that when I was younger. I don't know. I
Of
remember.
course,
Yeah, yeah.
right? I mean, we're programmed that way. And for me, the forgiveness, again, it was forgiveness for sure with my mother and my father. I could go on forever on those stories, but this is about your story. And about now, it's a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. Again, I thought, I'm done with dad, done with mom. Yep, life is great. And then, wait a minute,
Bow.
wait a minute, I thought I was done with you guys, right?
How powerful they are, and we are, the souls.
I know. So, there we go. My microphone is back. Okay.
No, I heard you, but it's interesting because at those moments, I find most people beat themselves up. And I certainly did years ago. It's like, what do you mean? I dealt with this already. And that really is a call for more love, more self-love.
Right. And that's it. It's more self-love. And for me, I have a friend who's a shaman. And I called her. I said, all right, so I think I need a journey. She's, oh, I need a journey. I'm like, okay. What do I need to do? She says, you need a conversation. Right. And so, bring them down. And for this happened to have been their shame that I was carrying. Right. And bring shame down. So whatever label, and we'll talk about labels as well, I put on that emotion. And so I said, okay, so I'll do that. And I did. And the two of them were like, oh, honey, that's over with. Right. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's all I had to do. So I was laughing.
Yeah, it's that conscious awareness.
Right.
Bringing conscious awareness with loving to that part inside of her.
It was hilarious. So I called my friend and she said, sometimes, and this has to do with forgiveness, we just need permission.
Right. Well, because society is so much like, you must not forgive. You have to keep angry.
Oh, I know. Let's punish those suckers. Let's make them hurt as much. It's like,
and that's just the misunderstanding of reality, because that person is you. Like anyone who's done Ho'oponopono also knows, like, we are one. So if you're like, I'm going to punish that person, it's like a boomerang that you will be punished somehow, this life or next.
It's the law. It's the karmic law. It's the law of attraction. It's the universal laws.
It's hard though, right? Because when you're whipped up and you're in this energy and you know how unfair life is, but that was another lesson, so we took my dad to court for wrongful death, because we felt like he got 2.5 years for shooting our mother in the head and killing her.
Right.
And he never took responsibility. So we took him to court for wrongful death. I mistakenly thought he would actually get on the stand and actually tell the truth, which a lot of people are like, if that person would just tell me, like people have been cheated on, if that person would just tell me, then I'll have closure. First of all, you probably won't have closure, because you know what? If my father told me why it happens or how it happens, it's not like it would be like, okay, now I know, let me close that chapter.
Right.
But there is this, we really have it in ourselves to heal without that other person, which is what you did with your parents too. Right. It's like, I can heal. We keep giving over power to other people. So sometimes that anger gets you more in control when you don't have control, or when you feel like you have no boundaries with the person's still in your life. You're angry, so you're not going to let them in. But that too, because that's how it was with my father when I was talking to him in the beginning, it turns in on itself. It does create a boundary with them, but it also closes that part of your heart to everybody, including yourself. So that's why it's great to work through those.
Well, and especially if you hang on to it. So I'm a believer that your feelings are valid and that you have a right to feel your feelings, right? But you don't have a right to wallow in your feelings, because that's not looking at them and saying, ooh, I'm feeling angry. This just came up. Why am I angry? What is it that I need to work on that I'm angry? And you said perfectly what that is. A boundary of mine has been crossed.
Right.
What do I do about that?
Right. Because otherwise you're indulging and making it worse. You're not actually healing anything. You're keeping that voice inside your head, whether it's theirs or yours, alive, that you actually have the power to get out of. And you can't, like you're saying, you can't get to the lesson if you stay in the emotions.
Right.
That's why I also think our emotions are valid. Sometimes they are definitely guiding us in the right direction. Sometimes they might not be, just because our perspective might be skewed from the damages that we've suffered over
Right.
in our lifetime. But to be able to like have the emotions and see them is pretty amazing, so that you can say, okay, like you definitely don't want to say they're wrong, because if you say they're wrong, they're going to show up even more to be heard, you know. So it really is important, like, to validate them, but then not honor them or make them your god, like these emotions are like this, because then you're going to end up, you know, that makes for a pretty sad life. I had it, you know, I lived like that for a long time.
Right. And we all think, for me, I would be described as, she's rough around the edges, right? Right. Rough around the edges. What does that mean? Right. That means you don't like what comes out of my mouth. Well, the reason I defended that, because I'm a street kid from the streets of Boston, you know, pretty rough. And it's like, well, that's my upbringing. No, that's a lot of anger. That's a lot
I
of
love
defense.
that. I'm so getting chills while you're saying that, as someone who grew up in Brooklyn, you know, and
Yeah.
some tough things. I love that. I'm getting, wow. That's so amazing that you were able to like really get out of that and understand that that's just like one aspect of you.
Well, it's and I believe, so this is my belief, and I love to say it's my belief, so you don't have to believe it or buy into it. It's my belief that we're given these opportunities, and if we can choose free will to let them consume us or let them grow us.
I love the way you say that.
Right.
Oh, that's a tweetable.
Right. There you go.
Yeah.
Tweetable. Consume us or grow us. Right. And so, you know, my choice, you know, is to grow from my experiences. And it wasn't always that way, you know, like you, because no one showed me that it could be that way.
Right. I mean, even my ability to love, like, nobody could get close to me after my father killed my mother, you know? And then it was doing this work that then I ended up getting married. We're divorced now, but, you know, now I'm engaged again. I would not have been able to open my heart again, because I was taught to like protect, or I was
Right.
taught to like, yeah, because you can, you know, even being in relationship is very courageous, because you can get hurt, but then if you know that you are responsible, that there is a way to choose, like, it's so good to be able to just like work on yourself so that you can create someone else who doesn't need to be whole with you, like you're both whole separately.
Right, right, right. Side by side hold, side by side
Right.
hold. So I'll share another quickie little story. This was years ago. My son was in college, his first year of college. And what happens when you leave high school and go to college? Boyfriend and girlfriends break up. Ta-da! What's news? So his girlfriend was going to one school, he was going to another. I knew it was coming, right? So I get this call. I was in San Diego, he was in New Hampshire, calling me in tears. And you talk about feeling like a terrible mother for not being there for him, right? And my words to him were this: I'm so sorry that you hurt that deeply, but that means you loved that deeply.
Mm.
And all I can say is, please allow yourself to take the risk again.
Oh, that's great.
Right?
It's
Because
nice.
you can't hurt that deeply if you didn't love that deeply.
It's true. That's
Right?
really true.
Right.
Yes.
And so that's a gift. And he now has an amazing wife. And oh my God, it's a fantastic marriage. They work on it. They work on it. They work on it.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have
Yeah.
to. You have to if you want to be happy.
Yes, yes, yes. And aware. They're very aware people.
That's
So
so great.
I know, isn't that fantastic? So I think that when it comes to forgiveness and love, right? How can you love? I think of the people that I know in my life who have so much toxic anger, and they happen to be fortunate enough to meet someone who loves them. And I watch 100% of the time that relationship get rotted.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, do they not see what they're doing? Even before I was aware, like I am now. I
Well,
was aware of that.
there's so many people who want to save, right? So they fall, their patterns dovetail. That person's angry or whatever, and the other person's like, oh, I'm going to save them. That's usually, in my experience, what happens.
Right.
So of course you can't save anyone. They have to want to help themselves. And, you know, I'm sure, I'm sure, as someone also who is a bit of an emotional caretaker, or was being growing up with my parents, you know, after a while, it can be disheartening for the caretaker when their needs aren't met. Or, you know, of course, the shadow side of the caretaker is the martyr. I'm
Right.
doing all of this for you and you're not doing anything for me, you know, so of course it's going to rot.
Exactly. Exactly. And honestly, I was there myself. I can remember thinking, you know, I just literally the word save, you know, I want to save them, literally that word. Right. And the day, the moment, the time that I realized, number one, it's not my job. Who the hell do I think I am to
Right.
save anybody? That's God's
Right.
job.
Right.
Right. Well, I'm God, but that's beside the point. So are you.
Right.
That's a whole other conversation.
God through us. Yeah.
Right. Right. But when I realized how egotistical of me to think that.
That is what I had that lesson with my father, actually, when I was 21. It was the second time my father left my mother for another woman. And unfortunately they got back together. But you know, he was really depressed because that other woman threw him out, and he was going to two different psychiatrists, getting different pills from each one because he didn't tell them. So he was a little bit of a mess.
You think?
And I would go meet him at 21. I'd meet him weekly. We'd go for these walks, and he would say, I'm going to kill myself. We'd be looking over the water by the Verrazano Bridge, and he'd be like, I'm going to kill myself. I've got nothing. I got nothing. I got nobody. And I'm like, I love you, Dad. And he just keeps saying it. And it was just getting to me. Every week it was the same thing. And I'd be pleading and begging, wanting to save him, right? Isn't my love enough? And then finally, I couldn't take it after 5 weeks. This is pieces in my show too. I couldn't take it because it was so significant. And I remember saying, and it was my inner guidance, which I didn't even know what that was at the
Right.
time, but
Right.
or to name it. And I said, Dad, I love you so much, but if your life is that miserable that you don't want to live anymore, who am I to say that you should? And funny enough, he got better the next day. He found a girlfriend, another girlfriend. He got ended up getting back with my mother and stuff like that. But like his energy changed. So it's interesting, right? Because in some weird way, my energy of wanting to save enabled him to stay in that pattern of
Exactly.
I'm going to do this. And when they do that, you know, he was also sucking all of my life force out of me. But I learned that lesson. I learned how I can't save him, and it is egotistical. Like, who am I, or who is anybody to say they can save someone else? You know, it's different, supporting, helping.
Right.
But like, I'm the only one. They're going to kill themselves if I don't. And that's, of course, that it happens a lot with like people with drugs and stuff like that. It's like that person, we're all souls. And so I do feel like sometimes people can maybe think that's cold. But once you've lived through it, it's like, it's it's accurate. Like, I cannot save you.
No, I can love you.
Right. I
Right.
can love you.
Right. I can love you. And I can maybe understand, though understanding is something that I try not to do anymore on anything,
Right.
because that's just me creating a story.
Right. Right. Because can
Right.
we really understand what they've gone through? I don't know.
I don't think so. No, I don't
On
even
a
understand
level.
myself half the time. How am I going to understand you? I mean, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. You know,
I can
but
feel I can empathize, you know, or empathize with you
right.
to a point. Yeah.
I can witness you.
Witness. I like that.
Yeah. I can witness you, but that's about it. I have a dear friend who recently passed away, and she spent her life slowly killing herself, and telling me, you know, I know that this is killing me and this is how I want to go.
It's like alcohol, or
Well, she was a functioning alcoholic. She smoked, she was bulimic, but she was also multiple personality,
okay.
right? So
Right.
there's a lot of darkness that she faced some of it,
Right.
but just was exhausted and didn't want to face anymore,
Right.
you know, and she lived with a husband who enabled it. And so what was my job? My job was just to be a friend of hers when I could.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's interesting though, as an empath, because I'm an empath, I imagine you are too. I can't even sometimes be friends, like, or close with people who have all that, because I literally take it on. Like, I have not figured out a way. Like, when I'm with clients and things like that, I prepare, I have my white lights, I have, I do my processes, my rituals, but it is hard for me to be around people who have recurring uh, problems that they keep getting into,
Yeah, it
where I
depends. It
am.
depends on the situation. Now, some people I've walked away from. A lot of
Yeah,
people I've walked away from,
right.
because that's where they want to be. Others, like her, I was able to let that energy pass through.
Yeah, which is great.
Yeah,
It's great if you can. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it
Yeah.
depends, I think, on the type of energy, because the energy from what I call an emotional vampire,
Yeah.
right? That I can't be around.
Right.
I just
Right.
can't be around. But she
Right.
was not a vampire. She was just
Yeah, maybe it's not that. Maybe for me it's like, maybe it's just I want them to change so much, and I know that's like bullshit. Like, I can't change them. I'm not getting in there. You know what I'm saying? It's like an old pattern of, come on, I just love you. I want you to make different choices. So
right.
I'm just like, I just can't. Yeah,
Right. But
interesting.
you can leave them with the question. So I have someone that I'm very, very close with who just recently had a trauma. And that trauma forced them over close to suicide, you know. But they recognized how sad they were and went out and sought help. And
Right.
now they absolutely go within when they get triggered. Isn't
Wonderful.
that,
It's
oh,
so it's so interesting. It's probably why you do this work too. Like, I think part of me, because I definitely faced wanting to take my life, I think part of me I teach is because I want people to know you don't have to have that slam into your life to go within and make it and have an easier experience. Like, if you catch it, if you get more conscious beforehand, like,
right.
learn from me, learn from us,
Listen,
and see
listen.
that you don't
Yes.
have to draw that in
Because you get the subtle
to make
messages.
it clean.
Yes, the last in your face that I had, that's again another story. But I remember being on the couch in my living room, thinking I was dying from a heart attack. My heart was that broken. I thought, and I'm like, this is how people die from a broken heart. People do die from a broken heart. Oh my God. And then I'm like, do I call 911? If I call 911, I'm going to go to the hospital and I know that I will then have heart issues. No, I'm not going to call 911. I'm going to say, God, what is it that I'm not learning? I don't want this lesson again. Help me
Wow.
understand. Right. And,
Yeah.
I went through this process of the choices that I was making continually. I could see the patterns. Once you face it, you can see your patterns.
Right.
Right. And then
With
why.
love.
Um,
Right.
and then I was just able to release it. And even the
And did it
why,
heal? It healed what was happening in your heart?
what ended up
Was,
happening
yeah.
is my heart like opened up, but in a way that's protected, whereas before it was open but vulnerable,
Right. Oh my
right?
God, that's such a beautiful story. As someone who's a director and I develop shows, I'm like, oh my God, can we just have that scene on stage where you're there
Right.
thinking you're dying from a broken heart and then you do that work? Like, that would be powerful to put into like a show talk, creative talk context. Wow, that's so
Yeah.
good.
It was that was the last major shift.
That's
It
beautiful.
Yeah, and it
Wow,
was it
that's so
was
conscious.
it was it was crazy. So the point being is that I don't want anyone else to have to lay on the couch and make a choice to call 911 or do the work,
Right.
right? The pattern was a repeating pattern. The universe will tap you on the shoulder, then give you a shove, then hit you on the head, then throw a brick at you. And for me, throw you through a brick wall, right? For you to learn the lesson. And the lesson is you don't have to do it this way. It doesn't have to hurt.
Right. And
It's
don't think other people aren't suffering. They are. Because, I've been teaching storytelling all these years. It's like people are suffering. I think part of the reason people don't ask for help and just stay on this stay by themselves is they don't realize how many people are suffering. They're really not alone. You know, when you're in that pain, you're so self-absorbed. Because I know for me, when I was in the darkest despair, I didn't think anybody lived through what I did. And the truth is, I've done my show many places. There, unfortunately, are for lots of people who have had their stepfather kill their mother, believe it or not. And I met one woman whose father killed her mother. They saw my show, and afterwards they were like, there was hope that they could be happy again. But the reason we don't hear it is because people are so filled with that shame that you were mentioning before. I was filled with so much shame, and that was when I couldn't speak about it. Then I healed it, and now I'm able to speak about it.
I can't tell anyone that this happened. I can't tell anyone that, right? I have to pretend everything is okay.
Right, because your self-esteem took such a hit with what happened. Right. But it's an inner job to build it up. That's the good news.
Right.
And always have good people around you.
Always have good people around you, and don't be afraid to walk away from those who aren't. I mean, I have family members, close family members, that I've literally said, I can't do this anymore, and have walked away.
Good for you. That is something that I, sometimes when I have clients coming to me, and I don't make people to leave their family, but I'm like, there's so much like codependence, not interdependence, of like, well, this family member treats me like shit, puts me down, but I better be there for them because, I have to. It's just pattern. It's just habits. It's like, well, how about you demand to be treated differently, and then they can decide if they're going to treat you with respect or not. And then it's in their shoes, whether, but people are so stuck. And I understand it, because I was very, very triangulated with my parents, loved them so much and very triangulated. And yeah, like you, I'm like, you don't have to deal with maybe you don't have to deal with something quite as shocking to be able to like loosen the grip of codependence or entanglement. Like you can just love, like you said, witness and love, but you don't learn that in school growing up. Oh, you can witness them and not make them wrong. If they're fighting, let them fight. It's okay.
Right.
To make them happier.
Right. Or even, again, I wouldn't even ask them why they're fighting.
Exactly.
Right.
Who cares?
Right.
It's their story and their karma, and
and they're not going to tell you the truth anyway.
No, because if people are in that place, they're stuck in, you're wrong, you did this to me, instead of, well, I'm fighting because I didn't get the love growing up, and my mother was like this to me, so I'm projecting that onto your mother. Like people, and they might say it if they have some they've been studying and doing the inner work after they get out of the trigger, but
right. But would they go as far as fighting if they had that much inner work that they were doing? They might say, I want to.
Occasionally, as someone who's pretty awake, I will say I do get caught. But what's so wonderful in my relationship is my fiance is also, he's done 30 years of inner work too. So it's really interesting to get pulled, because in relationships you can get triggered, right? If there's fire, you're gonna, I'm fiery, he's fiery. We'll get pulled in, but we get out of it really quickly, because for me, whether it's in the relationship or something else, I know what my body feels like when it's not anchored in truth. Right. So it means, okay, it's about something else, something else that is not in this moment, if it's bigger than the moment. So we call each other to task, that's for sure.
That's fantastic. And being in the moment, I think that's a whole other podcast. Right? Because, well, what does that mean? I mean, people say it, coaches say it as though it's so easy. And, without going through, well, what is it that you need to be aware of to understand what that means?
But it's a great other interview, because reading The Power of Now changed my life.
See.
And the first time I read it, I couldn't read it because I wasn't ready. And then the second time, it completely transformed my life.
Right. It is so powerful, because you're not making up story. You're not reliving a story. You're not reliving a story. And there's a pull. It's like you pull to the past. Well, I'm feeling this because when I was 7 years old, and then you pull to the future. Well, if I continue this way, right, this is where I'm going to go. Right. And it's like, no, right this minute, right now, this is what happened. And if we can stop naming our emotions, then we can't put a past or a future to them.
That's interesting.
Right?
What do you mean?
So one of the things our subconscious does is it puts things into folders, right? And so
Right.
you have a folder that says anger. So I'm angry. All right. So in the past, here's all the anger I've had, right? And here's how I respond to anger, right?
Mhm.
And so you start to respond that way. If instead you say, wait a minute, I'm feeling something right here in my gut.
Right.
And it's hot and it's burning. And it
Right.
happened at this moment. So there's something that happened at this moment that my body is telling me is not right. I wonder what just happened in this moment that my body doesn't like.
Yeah, that's great.
Yes.
It's I've done the presence process too. It reminds me a little bit of that, but one step further than that.
Yeah.
Like instead of going into the story or the emotion, like where my body am I feeling that? And then you just said something else that was like taking it one step further than
Well, it's understanding that, my body is reacting to this moment for some reason. And if you identify the reason being a past event, then you need to let go of the past event and focus on the current event, because usually the current event has nothing to do with that past event.
Right. It's just that feeling.
It's
That's
just
there.
it's just a familiar feeling.
Yeah, that's great.
Right. So that takes
Bye.
yay. So a little bit of coaching. Anyway, so Brenda, I have a lot of information that I want to share with people.
Great.
Right. So you are the founder and facilitator at Your Story Made Simple. You work with actors at Script French Theater still. I love that place. And you
Script French Theater. Oh yeah.
huh? And you teach.
Script French Theater actually produced my one woman show virtually last year.
Oh, I love that place. Love that place. So the next time that I'm in San Diego, I should really look you up because I go there frequently.
Except that I just moved to Los Angeles.
Well, I was in Simi Valley just a month ago.
I've performed in Simi Valley too.
See?
Where are you?
Right now I'm in New Hampshire. So I have a sister in Simi Valley that I visit. Hey everybody. So here's my life story.
Great.
Right? So definitely we'll hook up with you next time, because I do that whole, if I'm on the West Coast, I do from California, from San Diego up to
Simi Valley's not that far from where I am in LA.
No.
So yes, and then the other thing I wanted to say is that my membership is Soul Story Lounge, and that I'm really excited about. It's my inner circle where it's a mix of everything. It's storytelling for stage, for video, and also this inner process. And like, what is it like backstage as a performer? It's like everybody shows their shiny social media reels, but what's really going on when you have to share these vulnerable stories and stuff?
Right. It's really, really tough. And we'll have all of that stuff in the show notes. Great. So again, Brenda, thank you so much. And this is Gail Kraft from the Empowering Process podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. And if something in this interests you or you want more information, do comment and we will get back to you. If there's something here that maybe you know someone who could benefit from it, share it out. But always like it, subscribe us, let us know that you care, because we care too. Bye-bye, Brenda.
Bye, thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Empowering Process podcast. Be sure to visit Gail at gailcraft.com to learn more about how she serves thought leaders, entrepreneurs, and goal seekers. And remember, if you like this broadcast, be sure to share and subscribe so you don't miss an episode.